Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this Adeptus Custodes model for your games of Warhammer 40,000. So as you can see, I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. And now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm coming in with some Retributor armour, and I'm going to paint all over the armour to the model. And it's going to take a couple of coats to build up to a solid gold colour all over that armour. Just working a couple of thin layers of Retributor armour to build up to a solid gold colour all over the armour to our Adeptus Custodes. So at this stage I'm going to catch all of the armour plates, all of the detailings we want to be gold, as well as some of the detailings on the weapon as well. I'm going to make sure I catch all of these areas with a couple of layers of Retributor armour. As the gold armour is such an iconic part of the Adeptus Custodes and such a large part of the model, I'm going to ensure I catch all of this now with a couple of layers of Retributor armour. As you can see, after the first coat, coverage is still a little bit patchy, so I'm coming back in with the second coat to build up to that solid, smooth gold colour all over the armour to our model. As you can see, after a couple of layers of Retributor armour, I've got a solid gold colour all over the armour and the details to our model. So now I'm coming in with some Ryclan Flesh Shade, and with this I'm going to shade it all over the golden armour. Ryclan Flesh Shade works really well with Retributor armour and will give a really nice rich gold colour to our model. Just make sure you catch all of the areas you painted gold with a shade of Ryclan Flesh Shade. Give this a good while for the Ryclan Flesh Shade to fully dry before we move on to our next steps. And after that Ryclan Flesh Shade has dried, you can see it's settled into all of the recesses and given a really nice rich colour to our gold armour. So now it's time to highlight that armour. So I'm coming in with some Stormhost Silver, and with this I'm going to dry brush it all over the armour. So it's better to go light at this stage rather than too heavy, but just make sure you catch all of the raised details on the golden armour with a light dry brush of Stormhost Silver. If after one pass you think it's still a little bit too light, you can come back with another light dry brush of Stormhost Silver to build up. But it's better to start light and build up to a stronger highlight if needed. Just make sure you lightly dry brush all of the raised details with some Stormhost Silver. And with that Stormhost Silver dry brushed on, you can see it's really made that golden armour stand out. So now it's time to start picking out the details on the rest of our custody. So first of all, with some Mephiston Red, I'm going to come in and paint any of the fabric on the model. So for this one here, it's this cloth coming around their waist. I'm just going to pick this out with a couple of layers of Mephiston Red. Obviously being nice and careful around all of the gold armour we've already painted and highlighted. Just pick out all of the fabric with a couple of layers of Mephiston Red. Try and keep your paint nice and thin and build up in a couple of smooth layers so we get a nice smooth red colour all over the fabric. If you need to use a smaller brush when you get around any of the details, just to ensure you don't get any of the Mephiston Red over any of the gold. Just apply a couple of layers of Mephiston red all over the fabric. And I'm also going to paint the hair coming out of their helmet with Mephiston red as well. Make sure you work this into all of the crevices of the hair. Just make sure you catch all of this hair with a couple of layers of Mephiston red as well. And with that Mephiston red applied, you can see we've picked out the hair and the fabric. So the next thing I'm going to pick out is a few of the black details. So for this I'm coming in with some Corvus black. I'm going to apply this to the undersuit. So any of these little bits of ribbing you can see coming out from the joints in the armour. Just going to catch these with a couple of layers of Corvus black. I'm also picking out any of the cables on the models, like this one here on their waist. There's a couple of others dotted around as well, picking these out with some Corvus black. I'm going to pick out this cable here on their foot, as well as any others on the model, like the ones here on their helmet. I'm also going to paint all the other parts of the weapon that I don't want to be gold, so this will tidy up any of the Retributor armour we've got over other areas and give us a solid colour of black all over the weapon. Obviously be really careful around the areas of gold we've already painted. Just catch the rest of the weapon with some Corvus black. With that black applied, you can see it's made a lot of the details on the model stand out. So the next one's to add a bit of additional colour to certain parts of the model. So with some Screamer Pink now, I'm going to pick out these wrist guards on the model. So I'm just picking out all of the raised parts of the wrist guard with some Screamer Pink. Just give us a nice base coat on these areas. Being careful around any areas I want to remain gold, like the detailing on the top. I'm also going to pick out the strapping here on the handle to their sword. And these bits of detail here on their weapon as well. I'm picking these out with some Screamer Pink too. And with those details picked out, it's added a little pop of colour to our Custode. Now it's time to pick out the little bits of silver detailing on the model. So for this I'm coming in with Lead Belcher. And I'm going to pick out this emblem here on their leg, you can see. Being nice and careful around the gold, just picking out the raised parts of this emblem with some Lead Belcher. Just break up that gold colour a little bit and add some interest to the model. I'm also painting a little part here to their face mask, just painting in around the golden details, catching these areas with some Lead Belcher. And I'm picking out any of the details on the weapon I want. So it's things here like this part here at the back, this handle here next to the bolter element, as well as things here like the magazine housing and other details on the bolter. I'm picking these out with some Lead Belcher, being nice and careful around the other colours we've already painted. Just picking out some areas of detailing with some Lead Belcher. And of course I'm also going to pick out the blade at the end of the weapon as well. with a couple of coats of lead belcher. Now it's time to pick up the last few details. So for this, I'm coming in with Retributor Armour. I'm just going to pick out the bullet showing through here on the magazine. As well as this little bit of raised gold detailing here on the body to the weapon. Just picking this out with a layer of Retributor Armour. And with that Retributor Armour applied, that is the final base coat applied to the model. So now the next step is to shade these base coats we've just applied. And for this, I'm coming in with some Nuln Oil. And I'm just going to apply this as an all-over shade to all of those base coats we just applied. Also being nice and careful around the areas of Retributor Armour that we've already shaded and highlighted, but all of the areas that we've just painted, I'm going to catch these with a shade of Nuln Oil. So it's going to be all the areas: Corvus Black, Lead Belcher, Mephiston Red and Screamer Pink. Going to catch these with a shade of Nuln Oil. You don't want this to pull too heavily into any of the recesses. Just apply an all-over shade of Nuln Oil. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after that Nuln Oil has dried, you can see it's added definition to all of those base coats. So now it's time to start highlighting the model. The first thing I'm going to highlight is the areas of red. So to start with, I'm coming in with Mephiston Red again. And on the cloak, I'm going to apply this to all of the raised areas where the shade didn't settle. So wherever there's some Nuln Oil sitting in a recess, I'm coming in on either side of that with some Mephiston Red to bring these areas back up to their original colour. You can see here where we've got this raised part here, there's Nuln Oil in the recess on either side. So I'm coming in with Mephiston Red around that Nuln Oil, leaving the Nuln Oil in the recesses, but bringing the rest of the fabric back up to its brighter colour. Keep your paint nice and thin at this stage. Just work your way around, leaving the Nuln Oil in all of the recesses, but bringing the rest of the raised fabric areas back up to a bright colour of Mephiston Red. But you can see with that Mephiston Red applied, it's really brought the colour back to that fabric, leaving the darker Nuln Oil showing in the recesses. So now with a 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm going to come in and apply this in the middle of the areas that we just applied the Mephiston Red. So we'll leave a little bit of the Mephiston Red showing at the edges, focusing this onto the most raised points and highest areas of the fabric, on all of the areas that we just applied the Mephiston Red, coming in with a bit of this mix, applying a thin layer on all the most raised points. So you can see here I'm leaving a little bit of a mephiston red showing at the edges of all of these creases, but in the middle I'm applying a bit of this mix, and this will help build up the transition to our brighter highlights. On some of these flatter areas I'm working out where the light would hit the most, so in this case it's the lower part of this fold, and I'm focusing this mix onto that area that would catch the light the most. And with that 50-50 mix applied, you can see it's brightened up those areas a little bit more, and it's helping to build up that transition as we work towards our brightest highlights. So now with some pure Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm going to once again focus this into the middle of the areas that we just applied our previous step. So now you have a little bit of Mephiston Red showing through, a bit of the 50-50 mix, and then the Evil Sun Scarlet focused towards the highest points, most raised edges of the fabric, which will give us a really nice transition of dark to light. So once again, focus this to the areas that will catch the light the most and the most raised edges. Just apply a bit of Evil Sun Scarlet into the middle of all of the areas that we just applied our previous step. You want to keep your paint nice and thin at this stage and work in some smooth layers, as this will give us that nice transition as we work our way towards the final step. And with that Evil Sun Scarlet applied, you can see it's really brightened up those areas. You've got a really nice smooth transition from dark to light on the fabric. So now I'm coming in with some Wild Rider Red, and with this I'm just applying this as an edge highlight on all the sharpest points. So keep these lines nice and smooth. Just pick out the tops of all of the creases with a thin edge highlight of Wild Rider Red, as well as around the very edge of the fabric as well, catching this with a very thin edge highlight of Wild Rider Red. And on some of these flatter areas, I'm also painting a thin edge highlight of what would be the most raised point, like the lights catching the top of the fold. But just make sure you keep these lines nice and thin, and just apply some thin edge highlights of Wild Rider Red on the edge of all the details. And with that Wild Rider Red applied, you can see we've got a really nice effect on all the fabric. So now it's time to highlight the hair. So for this, I'm coming in with some Evil Sun Scarlet first. I'm going to dry brush this all over the hair. Be really careful when you're around the golden armour. Don't want to accidentally catch any of this over the gold. Just give a light dry brush of Evil Sun Scarlet all over the hair. You can see that Evil Sun Scarlet's picked out all of those strands of hair. There's one more step we'll do just to make the hair really stand out. And this is with some Wild Rider Red. And once again, dry brushing this over the hair, but focusing it towards the top and the very ends of the strands of hair. Just catching these with a light dry brush of Wild Rider Red, just to give the transition of light catching the very edges. And with that dry brush applied, that is the hair highlighted. So now it's time to move on to highlighting the gloves on the model. So for this I'm coming in with Screamer Pink first. And much like with the fabric, I'm applying this in all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever the Nuln Oil settled in a recess, I'm coming in on either side and bringing the rest of the gloves back up to colour with a thin coat of Screamer Pink. And with that Screamer Pink applied, let's brought those gloves back up to colour. So now it's time to apply an edge highlight. And so for this, I'm using Pink Horror. I'm going to apply a thin edge highlight around all of the raised details. Keep this line nice and thin. Just apply a small edge highlight on the very edges of all the details of their gloves. So wherever the Nuln Oil settled in a recess, we've brightened up on the edges and coming in and applying that thin edge highlight to all of those areas to really up the contrast on the gloves. And here on the sword, I'm also picking out all of the raised details on the handle with a thin edge highlight of Screamer Pink. I'm doing the same on their weapon in their hands as well. With that Screamer Pink applied, it's really made those details pop and stand out. So now it's time to highlight the black. For this, I'm using Mechanica Standard Grey. And all the areas of the undersuit, I'm going to pick out the ridged parts here with a thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey on the top of all of the ridges. On any of the cables, I'm just picking out the very edges with a thin spot of Mechanica Standard Grey as well. And on the weapon, I'm applying a chunky edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey on all the panels. Applying this as a chunky edge highlight so we can come back in at the next step and apply another highlight within this stage on the weapons. So make this a little bit thicker than the edge highlights you applied in previous steps. Just make sure you catch all of the black details of their weapon with a chunky edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. There are quite a lot of details on the weapon, so just take your time and make sure you catch the edges of all of them with this chunky highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. And with those highlights applied, you can see it's made the undersuit and the cables stand out. And we've got our chunky highlight on all the areas of the weapon that we're now going to apply a thin edge highlight within. For this edge highlight, I'm coming in with some Dawnstone. And I'm going to apply this within the Mechanica Standard Grey we just applied. So keep this one really nice and thin, focus just at the very edges, but apply a thin edge highlight of Dawnstone within that chunky highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey that we just applied. By using these two colours, it will really give the impression of sharpness on the weapon and really make all of these black details stand out and have interest on the model. So really take your time at this step. Make sure you keep these edge highlights nice and thin and just apply them all over the weapon within the Mechanica Standard Grey. And with that Dawnstone applied, you can see it's really made those highlights on the weapon stand out and added interest all over. So the next thing I'm going to highlight is the silver areas. So for this I'm coming in with Stormhost Silver. And I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight to all the areas we painted with lead belcher. So starting off with this detailing here on their leg, just catching all the edges with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. And all the details around the weapon, I'm applying an edge highlight around all the edges of the areas that we painted with lead belcher. This will give the impression of light catching off the sharpest edges. So just keep these lines nice and thin, just focus them to all of the edges of all of the details that we painted with lead belcher, and catch them all with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. At this stage I'm also catching the blade to catch the sharp edges. And with that Stormhost Silver applied, that's all of the highlights applied to the model. So now it's time to pick out a few extra details on our custody. So the first ones of these I'm coming in with Thousand Suns Blue. I'm going to pick out all of the gems on the model. So there's quite a few of these dotted around. So just take your time, work your way around the model and pick out all of these gem details with a base coat of Thousand Suns Blue. Try and be nice and careful when we're around other details we've already painted and highlighted. Just pick out all of these gems with a layer of Thousand Suns Blue. And with all the gems picked out, the next step is start adding some light effects to the gems. So now I'm coming in with some Temple Guard Blue. And with this, I'm going to apply a thin line in the bottom right hand corner of each of the gems. So you want to paint sort of a semicircle crescent shape in the bottom right hand corner of each of the gems. Keep this line nice and small, but just pick out that bottom right hand corner of every gem with a thin line of Temple Guard Blue. And with that Temple Guard Blue applied, you can see we've highlighted the bottom corner of each of the gems. So now with some white scar, I'm going to come in and paint a small spot in the top left hand corner of each of the gems. This will work with the line we painted in the bottom right hand corner to give the impression of light catching all of these gems. And with that white scar applied, you can see it's giving the effect of light catching all of the gems on our custody. So now the final step is to paint the glowing power effect on the blade. So for this, the first thing I'm doing is coming in with some Drakenhof Nightshade, which I'm thinning down with a little bit of water so it's not quite as strong. And I'm going to paint this all over the blade. This will darken it down and give it a blue hue, giving the effect of power running through the blade. And once that shade has dried, you can see we've got a nice dark blue hue all over the blade. So now with some Thousand Suns Blue, I'm going to come in and paint some lightning strike effects all over the blade. So for this one, I'm doing sort of jagged angles coming down the blade from the wing of the Aquila on the top all over the blade, different angles, and connecting them up a little bit like a spider's web. So this will give the impression of electricity or power shooting through the blade. So just paint jagged angles, jagged lightning bolts shooting over the blade. You can see after I've painted those lightning bolts on the blade. And now with some Temple Guard blue, I'm coming in and painting really thin lines within all of the lines of Thousand Suns blue we just applied. So focus these into the middle of all of the lines we just applied. And these two colours will work really well together to give the impression of power shooting through that blade and look really great on the model. So focus this into the middle of all the areas we just applied the previous step and apply a thin line of Temple Guard blue in the middle of our Thousand Suns blue. And with that Temple Guard blue applied, you can see it's really made those lines stand out on the blade. So there's just one final step left to apply, and that is with some white scar. I'm going to come in and paint a small spot of white wherever two lines meet. So wherever you've got two of your lines meeting anywhere on the blade, or where it moves down from the raised part to the lower part, I'm putting a small spot of white scar to give the impression of electricity crackling in these spots. Keep these spots nice and small. Just place them wherever two lines meet, all over the blade to the weapon. And with that white scar applied, you can see it's really given us a great effect all over that blade. And that is how to paint an Adeptus Custodes model for your games of Warhammer 40,000. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other models from any other factions you would like to see me paint? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!